Hello, Intro to Anatomy and Physiology. We are here today to talk about the polysynaptic reflex. Mostly we're just going to be talking about the neurons that you find in the spinal cord. And it's going to be a little bit of review of previous material fitting into this concept here. But really this is about reflexes. So if you're familiar with reflexes at all, right, there's lots of things that you might have a reflex to. Reaching out and touching like a hot stove and pulling your hand back, or stepping on something sharp and uncomfortable, pulling your foot up from that, or that classic effect when you go into the doctor and they have you sort of dangle your legs off the table, and then he takes his little rubber hammer and hits usually right underneath your knee, which you could do it to a sibling or a parent. And you could use really anything, even like your cell phone. It has a rubber case, kind of give it a little whack here. Now my foot is flexed and pulled up right now, so I wouldn't have that effect. But you can even do it to yourself, just so long as your foot isn't flex. So usually dangling off of a chair or something. Oh, I just made it work on my own foot here. But that is the same kind of, let's see if you can see my knee, that same kind of reflex that you can have. So that little effect right there is called the knee jerk reaction. And it's meant, I believe, in order to, it's a reflex to catch yourself if you're tripping. That's why we have that sort of effect where a leg kicks out if something sort of whacks it right underneath the knee there. And it all has to do with the spinal cord and nothing to do with the brain, interestingly enough. So what we're looking at here in this picture is a section of the spinal cord. So if we were to take the spinal cord, cut a little sliver of it out, and it's sort of little attachments, this is sort of what you would look at, and we're going to be labeling a different version of this in your notes packet today. Now, before we jump into the spinal cord, I wanted to review a few topics with you. We've already taken these notes down. I asked you to write them on the very back side of our notes packet. And we talked about the way that the nervous system is organized. We have our central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, and then our peripheral nervous system. What we're going to be talking about quite a bit today is this idea of these two pathways that we have in our body. So we have the sensory, also known as the afferent pathway, and that is where I can sense the world around me and bring that information to my brain and spinal cord to sense what's going on. It might be something you smell or something you hear, something you see or feel. The motor is the effect that my body has out on my system. So, you know, it's I feel a chill in the air, so I put a sweater on. I hear this door that keeps opening beside me inside to kind of block it a little bit. Whatever the case is, you have two pathways, the one going in, which is sensory, and the one going out, that is motor. And just remember, we had two names for them. So sensory, another term for it is afferent. You're going to see that word today. And then we have the motor, which is also known as the efferent pathway. Okay, we're not going to talk about this other stuff today, but just these two pathways. Okay, I guess I do want to also note, though, that the things that your motor has control over, remember, are your skeletal muscles as well as your glands. Okay, and so muscles and glands are what your motor unit can control. Okay, so this is a picture from your notes, your slide, the notes packet I gave you. This is on page 6. Page 6. You're going to want to copy this information down because you're going to see this on your homework. All right, so the first thing, I already have some labels written on here that I'd like you to copy down. This is, again, a section of the spinal cord. When we look at the spinal cord, there's a few different things that you notice right away. One of those is this thing that kind of looks like a butterfly shape in the middle. That butterfly shape is always a little bit darker in color, whether it's in like an animated picture or whatever, and that is your gray matter. So write down gray matter or label that section there as being the gray matter of the spinal cord. Now surrounding it, sometimes it looks yellow in pictures, but this is the white matter. Now what determines if this is gray or white is myelin. So if you remember on a neuron, the Schwann cells produce myelin, and it's that covering, the myelin sheath that covers up your neurons. And as we saw on the last set of notes, those myelin sheaths actually help speed up the signals being sent from neurons. So you have white matter and you have gray matter. Okay, that'll come back into play a little bit later. And the other little label, and I'll come back to this later, eventually here, but this tiny little arcing piece inside the gray matter, I want you to label that as an interneuron, and I'll come back to that here in a second. All right, so what we're looking at, you can label this little picture the 3-neuron arc. Okay? And you can see we're going to have 3 neurons we're going to look at today. So here's one of them. It goes basically from the skin here and then up to just a little tip there in the gray matter. And then the second neuron is this guy, the interneuron. And then the third guy is this one going out. And then this is representing a muscle. So that's the 3-neuron arc. It's also called the polysynaptic reflex. Polysynaptic meaning there's multiple synapses where 2 neurons come together, right? So we've got a synapse here, we have a synapse here. We also have synapses where it meets the skin as well as the muscle as well. So that's what it means by polysynaptic reflex. There's more than one synapse connection between the neurons. Now, we're going to talk about the different parts of a reflex. So in this case, this picture, there's a needle in the skin, right? Something sharp, let's say, pokes you, and you have that jerk reaction to pull your arm back away from that negative stimulus. And so we're talking a reflex, and this has nothing to do with the brain. What's super cool about reflexes is it all happens without even sending a signal to the brain in the immediacy, just so that your reflexes are very fast. It happens super speedy. All right, so there's 5 different parts. I'm using these yellow bubbles so you can see what those 5 parts are easily. So on your paper, you don't have to like color it yellow, but you might identify it some way, whether it's numbering 1 through 5 or doing just a little bubble around each one. All right, so the first step, the first thing that happens in a reflex is you have receptors all over your body. In this case, receptors in the skin that are going to sense pain. So a needle punctures your skin, your receptors are going to identify, right, that pain. And that's the receptor, right? You have them all over your body. Then the signal that you just got poked with a needle is going to travel up this first neuron here. This neuron is the sensory or afferent neuron, or that afferent pathway that we talked about before. So this is going away from the stimulus, that needle, going towards the spinal cord through my sensory afferent neuron. Then it gets to the spinal cord at the interneuron, and this step of the reflex, we call this the integration step, because the interneuron is going to connect the sensory neuron with our third neuron, the motor or efferent neuron. So the integration piece here, what's important is most of my nervous signals get sent to my brain, then my brain does the processing and integration, decides what to do, and then sends a signal back out. In the case of a reflex, it goes to the spinal cord and straight back out without even talking to your brain. So this doesn't send it up the spinal cord. It just stays localized in that area. This helps speed up your reaction to whatever reflex you're experiencing. So we have our sensory, the integration piece, and then the motor efferent neuron that's going to send a signal out. So I just got poked in the hand and I'm going to pull my hand back is a motor reaction. And so this is going to be my effector that has that muscle reaction to pull my hand back. So effectors can be one of two things, only one of two things. Effectors are always either a muscle or a gland, nothing else. And this is what I think is so cool about the nervous system is the only thing you control. Think of everything you've done today. The only thing you control are muscles and glands. The only thing you consciously control are muscles. So in all of the grading I've done today, or the talking I've done, or petting my dog, every single thing I've done was a muscle control that I've had over my body. Now, my body also controlled my glands, but those are all unconscious decisions. So those are the 5 different parts of a reflex. There's something else called a monosynaptic reflex, where it just uses 2 neurons, but that's not super important. So we won't go through that set of notes. Okay, you'll see this picture on your homework assignment. Now, we are going to label another picture in your notes, but before we do that, I wanted to review something else. On the very front of your packet, we took notes over our different types of neurons. We have a multipolar neuron, we have the bipolar neuron, and the unipolar neuron. They're going to show back up here in our spinal cord section. So the multipolar neuron, this is our classic neuron, right? Here's the cell body with its dendrites, our axon, it's got the Schwann cells and the myelin sheath, and then here would be the dendrites of a multipolar neuron. The bipolar neuron we actually won't look at today. Remember, these are only found in the eyes and the nose. But then the unipolar neurons are going to be important today too. And the unipolar neurons, if you look here at the other notes we took down, they are different types of sensory neurons, and we're going to find them in the sensory pathway of our spinal cord. Now, pay attention to the structure here. It's different than our classic multipolar neuron. The cell body kind of sticks up in the middle of the neuron. And we've got one end that's the dendrite end, that's the peripheral process. And then the other end, we call that the central process. And then these would be those axon terminals. So if this were the neuron, the signal would be going this way from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen based on these identifying features here. You're going to see this here in our neuron that we're going to label. So this guy is on page 2 of your study guide. What I would do if I were you, okay, is get 3 different colors. I've got blue, green, and red. If you have highlighters, that's perfect. You could do like the blue, I don't know, yellow and pink, or any 3 colors. They're not important, but I do want you to have 3 colors to label these. It's so much easier to identify than just the plain black and white picture. And if you want to get super fun, you can color this. So pause, get your 3 colors. Okay, I'm hoping you guys are back and you have 3 colors. What you can do before we even begin is sort of on your packet trace where, see how this is blue, including that little cell body there, and this is blue, and look closely, just like a little tiny V of blue right here. This piece that's green, okay, is another type of neuron, and it's got its little dendrites and cell body, very, very short axon, and then its axon terminal. So do that one a different color. And then we've got our other one. And so you can highlight or color all of this one a different color, okay? So those are 3 different types of neurons, and it's important that you know the difference. So just like on the other picture, we are checking out a section of the spinal cord here. And a few things that we are going to identify. So what I just had you color, and I even color coded my label on this one, this is the sensory unipolar neuron. So on our previous picture, okay, we talked about the reflex arc. We're looking at our spinal cord structure here. This guy is going to be the one, this would be where my skin was getting poked with a needle. And notice the arrow. The signal is going from this direction towards the spinal cord. Now, pay attention to the structure here. Okay? This has, okay, our, sorry, I'll get into that in a second. The other neuron that I had you color, okay, is our interneuron, also called an association neuron. Those words are interchangeable at times. And it is a multipolar neuron. So it's that classic neuron, like what's on the very front of your study guide packet, cell body, dendrites, axon terminals. This one is the unique guy, okay, the unipolar neuron. And then our third one here is another, just our very classic multipolar motor neuron, the one that you've seen before. It's got a much longer axon as well. So these axons would eventually, they turn into nerves that would get sent out, to different areas of the body and stimulate different things. Also pay attention to these arrows. This arrow is coming in for my sensory neuron. This arrow is going out for my motor. Sensory is receiving information and bringing it to the spinal cord. Motor is having some reaction and sending, a muscle contraction or something out towards my body. So let's talk more about the sensory unipolar neuron structure. So we just reviewed it on the previous slide here. Okay. So this little guy that's sticking up right here is the cell body, and that's significant. We've got I'll talk about that later. The dendrites here, okay, which is on the peripheral process. So everything on the dendrite side of it's the peripheral process of my unipolar neuron. And then everything on the inner portion of my cell body is going to be the central process. So that's all my central process of the neuron. Now, as I mentioned, the cell body is right here in the middle. If you look at the motor neuron, its cell body is found inside the spinal cord. So the cell body of this unipolar neuron is unique because it's not found in the spinal cord. Most of the other neuron cell bodies are. So that's where the nucleus and main parts of the cell are. In this case, because you have this cluster of little things that are bulging off, you end up, if you look at the outside of this, there's a bulge here on the portion of our spinal cord. Notice how there's no bulge on this side. This is called the dorsal root ganglion. Dorsal root ganglion. The ganglion is just kind of like a bulge. And so it's on the dorsal side. I really wish I had, we were in class and I could show you guys a model of this. But if I were to pull this section of the spinal cord, let's say I pulled it out of my back or out of a model, this section right here with the bulge would be on my dorsal side, closer to the back. And so we call this the dorsal root, This entire track is the dorsal root. It's easy to identify in pictures because the dorsal root, the backside, is going to always have the bulge. So if you can remember the little bump, it's going to be dorsal towards the back. And we have here, okay, if it's not dorsal, it's ventral. So ventral is towards the front side of your body. So the ventral root in your spinal cord, in your back, it's going to be closer to the front. So if these were my two tracks in my body, okay, my thumb would be towards the back side of my body, okay, dorsal, and then the one on the front, ventral. Usually it's set up anatomically correct. So you're looking at the back is usually on the back side of the paper, ventral's on the front, but who knows, some diagrams might be different. So always look, if that dorsal root ganglion's there, you know that's a dorsal root because of the cluster of cell bodies that are there. Now the other cell bodies inside our spinal cord are both right here. Let's see. So these cell bodies, I want you to draw two lines here. They are both, and if you notice, they're inside that butterfly shape. And if you look at the front of your packet, okay, and you look at the neuron, there's not myelin around your cell bodies. Right? There's no myelin there. There's no Schwann cells or protective structures. So this is why we have gray matter, okay, and white matter in our spinal cords. That little butterfly shape that you have there, that's actually the cell bodies of my multipolar neurons, right? So these are both multipolar neurons. One is part of my motor pathway, and then the other one's the interneuron. Both of them do not have myelin, no Schwann cells, and so they make up the gray matter inside of my spinal cord. So that's what makes or forms the spinal cord, is just cell bodies, okay? All right. I believe that's all the notes that you need to take down. This slide's just here to review with you. Okay, this is my multipolar neuron. It's a motor neuron. It affects, it sends an impulse to muscles. The bipolar neurons, these guys are just in my nose and eyes. And then a sensory neuron out to my skin where it can feel things is going to be the impulse heading towards my spinal cord. And look, they even drew on here, you can see the cell body and that dorsal root ganglion, that little bulge. So I can tell that that's my dorsal root. And I can tell that this is my ventral root on that picture. All right, that's it. That's all. I hope you guys have an awesome day. Have an awesome one. I miss you.